Welcome to my channel where I talk about Latter-day Saint lifestyle beliefs and practices. And in this video, you have stumbled across a video about the Book of Mormon, where I'm reading it from cover to cover. So whether you're new to my channel or whether you've been following me for a while, welcome. I'm excited to share with you the wonderful teachings in this Book of Mormon. And of course, you can see other playlists of mine where I talk about my adventures of going to church, my Come to Church With Me playlist, and other aspects of beliefs and practices within the Latter-day Saint community. I love being able to share these things with you, and I'm glad to have you aboard. So we're going to be reading in Mosiah Chapter 21. We're about a third of the way through the Book of Mormon, and we are right in the middle of a narrative of the people of Limhi, who are now captive to Lamanites. They are paying a 50% tax. There's just been a huge debacle in the previous chapter, which you can get caught up on if you want, a huge miscommunication that led to war, and now they've been able to extract themselves from that, and they have a tenuous peace. But of course, the people of Limhi paying this awful high tax are starting to feel desperate and burdened by their situation. So we will see in this chapter some of the solutions they come up with and how their solutions fail, and that a lot of times they, like us in our lives, when you reach rock bottom, failure after failure, you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, is there more? Is there something I'm missing? Is there something I should be doing or not doing? Am I working at this all wrong? Am I looking at this situation all wrong? And that is what the people end up doing. And they realize, wait, maybe we've been forgetting God. Maybe the situation we're in can be changed if we look at things differently. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started with this chapter and see what we can learn. Chapter 21, in Mosiah, Limhi's people are smitten and defeated by the Lamanites. Limhi's people meet Ammon and are converted. They tell Ammon of the 24 Jaredite plates. Okay, so I just want to break back out of the narrative of this book for a minute and throw out there that if you're new to looking at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you're just curious to understand more about what we believe, yes, the Book of Mormon is a great way to do that. But if you look at my playlist, it is very, very long. Many hours to listen to me read it. So if you're wanting a quicker way to get kind of an overview of what Latter-day Saints believe, then just go to the Church of Jesus Christ .org. I think that's our website, and look at like some basic beliefs, and you can sign up for a newsletter there. You can scroll through some of the things that we believe, learn more about Jesus Christ. And if that is what you're looking for, maybe that would be more efficient. But if you want to understand the Book of Mormon, which is the basis for much of what we believe, then again, glad to have you aboard. Let's keep doing this. So let's keep going down the choo-choo train track with this chapter. All right, verse 1. It came to pass that Limhi and his people returned to the city of Nephi and began to dwell in the land of peace. And of course, this is right after a treaty where they had war with the Lamanites that was all around a horrible misunderstanding, and they have once again established peace. It came to pass after many days, the Lamanites began again to be stirred up in anger against the Nephites, and they began to come into the borders of the land round about. Now they durst not slay them, because of the oath which their king had made unto Limhi, but they would smite them on their cheeks and exercise authority over them, and they began to put heavy burdens upon their backs and drive them as they would a dumb ass. And all this was done that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. Okay, so we'll take a little break there. So the Lamanites, again, are in charge of, or the captors of the people of Limhi, who are the captees, and they pay a 50% tax. And the big misunderstanding from the last chapter was because there had been a crime committed in the Lamanite community, and it was blamed on the people of Limhi, but it wasn't their fault. So the Lamanites had gotten really mad at the people of Limhi, thinking it was their fault. So their name has been cleared. But as per psychology for people, when they get really mad about something, it's really hard, even if it's proven wrong, it's really hard to get that anger out of someone's brain. Once it's there, it's almost like steeped inside those brain cells of this is just the truth, because anger kind of like, we really connect with anger in our brain. So these people of the Lamanites are mad for no reason because the Limhi people were cleared. Their name was cleared from the crime that they were accused of in the last chapter. But nonetheless, the Lamanites are mad, and they're starting to be abusive to the people of Limhi. Verse 5, and now the afflictions of the Nephites were great. The Nephites are the people of Limhi, by the way. So that's the same thing. The Nephites, the people of Limhi, same thing in this particular chapter. There was no way that these Nephites could deliver themselves out of their hands, for the Lamanites had surrounded them on every side. And it came to pass that the people began to murmur with the king because of their afflictions. They began to be desirous to go against them to battle. So again, there's a treaty, and they shouldn't go to battle. They shouldn't break the treaty according to the terms of such treaty. But because the Lamanites had become so abusive and mean, they're willing to perhaps break that treaty. So the Lamanites afflicted the Nephites, the people, the Nephites, the Limhiites, did afflict their king sorely with their complaints. Therefore he granted unto them that they should do according to their desires. And they gathered themselves together again and put on their armor and went forth against the Lamanites to drive them out of their land. And it came to pass that the Lamanites did beat them and drove them back and slew many of them. And now there was a great mourning and a lamentation among the people of Limhi, the widow mourning for her husband, the son and daughter mourning for their father, and the brothers for their brethren. And there was a great many widows in the land, and they did cry mightily from day to day, for a great fear of the Lamanites had come upon them. And it came to pass that the continual cries did stir up the remainder of the people of Limhi to anger against the Lamanites. And they went again to battle, and they were driven back again, suffering much loss. So again, I give my interpretations, my spin, and my stream of consciousness thoughts about what I'm reading, but that does not mean that is the interpretation of Scripture, because as I talked about at the end of my last episode, is that Scripture ultimately is a mediator of this, that the Spirit can work through you. So you're showing up to read Scripture, you're showing God, I'm willing to learn, I'm opening myself to thee, I'm asking for the Spirit to come. Hopefully you're opening your study with prayer, and that the Scripture can invite the Spirit to teach you. So it's not necessarily always even about specifically what you're reading, although sometimes, a lot of times what you're reading, you're learning something important and wise, or something specific for your life. But sometimes the Spirit is actually just teaching you something different that is mediated by this moment of willingness that you come to God to read these scriptures. So anyway, I just kind of went down a rabbit hole because I was going to give a little spin on what I'm reading, and it's probably not that helpful and probably not that spiritual. But I'm just noticing that when the people of Limhi, they go up against the Lamanites and they get kind of half destroyed. They're beaten back. They lose all kinds of men. So the women are complaining, the children are crying, like everyone's really sad. And because of how sad they are, then they're stirred up in anger to go to battle again. Like that seems pretty irrational to me, because if you've just been, half destroyed and lost a lot of your men, being really angry about that just doesn't make a lot of sense to go back to war again, where you're going to lose more men again. I mean, even if you win, you're going to lose more men. But anger is not rational, right? Anger is not rational. So that if I was in a place where I was dealing with anger and revenge, perhaps on my mind, then the scriptures could remind me, anger's not rational. Do things out of revenge, you're only going to end up hurting yourself. It's a pretty obvious lesson here. Yea, they went again even a third time and suffered in like manner. And those that were not slain returned again to the city of Nephi. So after 3 times of going up against the Lamanites, I imagine they've lost plenty of men. There are plenty of widows and plenty of orphans and, well, semi-orphans, right? Because I'm assuming they still have their mother. But all of this while they're still paying a 50% tax. So it's going to get really ugly, because when you're losing a lot of your breadwinners and you still have to produce the same amount of tax, ouch. Verse 13, they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro, and burdened according to the desires of their enemies. And they did humble themselves even in the depths of humility, and they did cry mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God, that he would deliver them out of their afflictions. Now, I love this moment because I can identify with this. And, if you've lived more than a brief time on this earth, you probably can identify too, where you come up against something that's so heavy, so hard. All of your brilliant solutions have failed. In fact, some of your brilliant solutions have probably backfired, and now things are worse than ever. I know I've been there multiple times in my life, and I'm going to assume if you're a human that you have too. At least, most of us have been there. And that, isn't it wonderful that we get these opportunities to realize we're weak? Because when we can realize how weak we are, then we realize we're reliant on God, that He knows more, that it's not all about us. We don't have all the answers. We cannot force things to be the way we want. If the people of Limhi could have forced it, they would have won at this point. Like they've given everything they could. They've come 3 times in a row to fight against their oppressors to no good effect. All they have now is a bunch of widows and half orphans. Very, very depressing. So they are humble and they're praying, they're reaching for God. And that's a good place. That's a good place when we're that way, when God finally has our attention. And of course, it's better if we remember that every day of our lives without being required to be humble. It's better to just be humble without being required to be humble. But it is good to be humble even if you are required. And that is what is happening here. So verse 15, I think this is a fascinating verse, by the way. I'll tell you why in a minute. Now the Lord was slow to hear their cries because of their iniquities. Nevertheless, the Lord did hear their cries and began to soften the hearts of the Lamanites, that they began to ease their burdens. Yet the Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. So one of the things I love about all scripture in general, and of course about the Book of Mormon, since we're talking about that, since I'm reading that to you, is that we learn about God's character in the scriptures. And here's a nice little moment where we're learning about God's character. He's slow to hear their cries because of their iniquities. They were perhaps dismissive, not paying attention to Him, not listening to or prioritizing Him. And so He's going to take His time. But nonetheless, He did hear their cries, and He did start to soften the hearts of the Lamanites. Nevertheless, He did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. So can we compare that to anything in our lives? I know I can. Times that maybe I'm not as quick to hear God, then maybe I should be a little patient on that He's going to take His time hearing me, but He's still going to hear me, and I can have faith in that. And that maybe there's still some purpose in Him not seeing fit to deliver them or me, in my circumstances, out of bondage yet. If there's still a lesson to be learned, if there's still something more that needs to be accomplished, we can understand that sometimes God works with us in that way, and it is ultimately for our good. It came to pass that they began to prosper by degrees in the land, and began to raise grain more abundantly, and flocks and herds, and they did not suffer with hunger. So this is good. The burden is being somewhat lightened, and conditions are improving to a degree. And even within captivity, even within their adverse circumstance, as they are calling upon the Lord and humbling themselves, their circumstances are easing. And it can be that way for us too. If we're trapped in just unbearable circumstances, if we kick against it harder and harder, it doesn't necessarily improve things. Usually makes it worse. But being humble, accepting, yes, this is my circumstance, but I'm going to turn to God. I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to ask for His help. That we can start to get a little bit of momentum to, a little bit more strength, a little bit more of the easing of that burden. It's still there, but it's not what it was at the worst moments. Now, there were a great number of women, more than there was of men. Wonder why? Probably something about war. Therefore, King Limhi commanded that every man should impart to the support of the widows and their children, that they might not perish with hunger. And this they did because of the greatness of the number that had been slain. Now the people of Limhi kept together in a body as much as it were possible, and secured their grains and their flocks. So for national security, they're not being vulnerable and splitting up, right? They're watching each other's backs, and they're having to be very vigilant because they have these aggressors that they never know when they're going to be attacked. And the king himself did not trust his person without the walls of the city, unless he took his guards with him, fearing that he might by some means fall into the hands of the Lamanites. That's some pretty scary circumstances if you're that afraid. He caused that his people should watch the land round about, that by some means they might take those priests that fled into the wilderness, who had stolen the daughters of the Lamanites, that had caused such great destruction to come upon them. And for a reminder of that whole story, see the previous chapter. For they were desirous to take them, that they might punish them. For they had come into the land of Nephi by night, and carried off their grain and many of their precious things. Therefore they laid wait for them. So these nasty, gross priests that are hanging out in the forest with those abducted Lamanite daughters that they'd taken, they are now coming in to Nephite territory, the people of Limhi, and taking provisions. So yeah, they are blight upon the face of the earth. It came to pass that there was no more disturbance between the Lamanites and the people of Limhi, even until the time that Ammon and his brethren came into the land. And that's a flashback way back. I don't even know how many chapters, probably 12 or so, when Ammon and his brethren exploring came to the land of Limhi and discovered the people of Limhi, and they're getting this whole backstory. That's why we're hearing this story. So if you're confused, don't worry, you can look up Book of Mormon chronology online to try to bring yourself up to speed on what that all is about. But this is a story within a story, and Ammon, that's a flashback to something that happened several chapters ago. And the king, having been without the gates of the city with his guard, discovered Ammon and his brethren, and supposing them to be priests of Noah, therefore he caused that they should be taken and bound and cast into prison. And had they been the priests of Noah, he would have caused that they should be put to death. Again, if we go back X number of chapters, a dozen or so, when Ammon the explorer and his brethren come into Limhi's vicinity, that is why he was treated so harshly, is they suspected maybe he was one of those priests that had been in hiding. But when Limhi found that they were not, that Ammon and his brethren were not the wicked priests, but were former brethren of them, that had come from the land of Zarahemla, he was filled with great joy. So Ammon and the people of Limhi all are from the same place. So the people of Limhi are like, yes, Ammon is going to save us. He's going to help us. We're so glad he showed up. Now King Limhi had sent, previous to the coming of Ammon, a small number of men to search for the land of Zarahemla, which is where Ammon had come from, which is ultimately where Limhi's people originally came from years ago. But they could not find it. They could not find the land of Zarahemla, and they were lost in the wilderness. Nevertheless, they did find a land which had been peopled, yea, a land which was covered with dry bones, yea, a land which had been peopled, which had been destroyed. And they, having supposed it to be the land of Zarahemla, returned to the land of Nephi, having arrived in the borders of the land not many days before the coming of Ammon. So this is an intersection of multiple storylines. And again, if you're lost, don't worry about it. You can look up a Book of Mormon chronology online and see how this all intersects. But these people of Limhi, they, a couple generations back, had left the land of Zarahemla to go find their previous Nephite place that they left way, way, way before then, found the land of Nephi, ended up becoming captive to the Lamanites who lived in the land of Nephi, and they sent out a little contingent of people to go back looking for the land of Zarahemla. But they don't find the land of Zarahemla, they find this other land where people had annihilated each other, but they thought that was the land of Zarahemla. So lots of misunderstandings. So they go back home thinking, oh, Zarahemla's been destroyed. Meanwhile, Ammon shows up from Zarahemla, and they're like, oh, great, Zarahemla's not destroyed. The people of the Nephites back at home still exist. This is good. So really, really fascinating intersection of multiple storylines. So those people from the people of Limhi, the Nephites living under Lamanite rule, when they went out looking for the land of Zarahemla and found a people that had been annihilated, now in verse 27, it says they brought a record with them, even a record of the people whose bones they had found, and it was engraven on plates of ore. So while they were out exploring and found this place where they annihilated each other or one another, they found plates, they found records of these people, and they brought that back, which would be really cool to read, and we get to find out about that later. And now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God whereby he could interpret such engravings. Yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. And again, this is a flashback to several chapters before where Limhi asked Ammon, can you translate these plates? And Ammon says, I can't, but the king back at home, he can. Verse 29, yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow because of so many of their brethren who had been slain. And also that King Noah and his priests had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God. And they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure of Alma and the people that went with him, who had formed a church of God through the strength and power of God and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. So we've got groups of people going everywhere, because now Alma's off who knows where. We've got the Nephites back at home in Zarahemla. We've got the Lamanites here in the land of Nephi. We've got the Limhiites who came originally a couple generations ago from the land of Nephi, who lived in Zarahemla, but now they're under the Lamanites. And then you've got what we will find out later are the Jaredites, which are this group of people, or maybe it's the Mulekites, I'm a little lost, that killed each other off, and we've got their record. So there, if you've ever heard that there's a lot of complicated crisscrossing timelines and interwoven stories in the Book of Mormon, it's true. And although I have never struggled with my testimony of whether the Book of Mormon is real scripture, to me, this is a bit of a testimony. Who could just write this? And it actually all works. Like if you plot it all out on timelines and so forth, it actually works. It's fascinating. Okay, verse 31. They did mourn for their departure, for they knew not whither they had fled. And this is the people of Alma. The people of Alma who now are their own little church, and they're off fleeing for safety. So they did not know where the people of Alma had gone. Now they would have gladly joined with them, for they themselves had entered into a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments. So we've seen this whole group, like Noah's kingdom has mostly come around to worship God, from being completely, under the spell of this wicked ruler. And now you've got Alma and his people have joined the Church of God. And now for the most part, Limhi's people are also worshiping God, which is cool. It came to pass that King Limhi and many of his people were desirous to be baptized, but there was none in the land that had authority from God. And Alma does, but he left. And Ammon declined doing this thing, considering himself an unworthy servant. I think that's interesting. Don't know Ammon's backstory, why he's hesitant, but he considered himself unworthy. So that's really cool. He's honest about that. Therefore, they did not at that time form themselves into a church, waiting upon the Spirit of the Lord. Now they were desirous to become even as Alma and his brethren, who had fled into the wilderness. And to hear that story, see a couple chapters previous, where we learn about Alma and his brethren creating a church and then fleeing for safety. They were desirous to be baptized as a witness and a testimony that they were willing to serve God with all their hearts. Nevertheless, they did prolong the time, and an account of their baptism shall be given hereafter. That's going to be cool. And now all the study of Ammon and his people and King Limhi and his people was to deliver themselves out of the hands of the Lamanites from bondage. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. We finally get these two groups of people, Ammon and the explorers, talking to King Limhi. They find out the entire backstory of what's happening with Limhi, and they realize what dire straits Limhi and his people are in. And now Ammon and Limhi are studying together. How can we finally break free from the Lamanites? We've been repulsed back 3 times. We've lost so much life. Now, how can we finally get free? We need to be free. So tune back in next time to find out what happens next. And of course, I encourage you to continue to study any scripture on your own, to pray, to seek the Spirit of God in your life in whatever form feels good, right, and that you feel like you're being called to do at this point in your life. And I'll see you next time.